At 60 years old, I was ready to wait for the end in silence, until a simple phone call changed everything. I'm Margaret, and what happened to me proves that life's greatest chapters can begin when you least expect them. If you've ever felt forgotten by the world, please stay with me. And if my story touches your heart, I'd love to hear your own experiences in the comments below. My name is Margaret Eleanor Walsh, and 3 months after my 60th birthday, I had convinced myself that my story was over. The morning of March 15th started like all the others had for the past 2 years. I woke up in my empty 4-bedroom house in suburban Ohio at exactly 6:47 a.m. not because of an alarm, but because silence has its own cruel punctuality. The other side of the bed hadn't been disturbed since Harold passed away 731 days earlier. Yes, I counted every single one. I shuffled to the kitchen in the same faded pink slippers that Harold had given me for our 35th anniversary. The coffee maker gurgled to life, brewing a single cup instead of the pot Harold and I used to share. While planning our day together, the morning light filtered through curtains I hadn't opened fully in months, casting long shadows across the dining table where I now ate alone. The routine was always the same: coffee, toast, and the suffocating weight of another day stretching endlessly before me. I'd sit in Harold's old recliner, remote in hand, flipping through channels without really watching anything. The house felt like a museum of memories, each room an exhibit of a life that once mattered. My daughter Sarah lived just 40 minutes away, but she might as well have been on another planet. After Harold's funeral, she'd made the obligatory check-ins, bringing casseroles and forced conversations about getting back out there, but as weeks turned to months, her calls became shorter, her visits less frequent. She had her own family, her own life, her own problems. I understood. Really, I did. But understanding doesn't make loneliness hurt any less. The grandchildren I'd raised from infancy now seemed like strangers. When they did visit, they were glued to their phones, giving me polite nods and quick hugs. Before disappearing into the guest room, I'd become the old lady they had to endure, the obligation they checked off their list. My friends from the church auxiliary had gradually faded away too. At first, they'd invite me to their weekly coffee meetings and evening bridge games. But grief, I learned, makes people uncomfortable. My sadness was too heavy for their light conversations about grandchildren's achievements and vacation plans. Eventually, the invitations stopped coming. The mirror in my bedroom reflected someone I barely recognized. My once bright hazel eyes had dulled to a tired brown. My silver hair, which Harold always said made me look distinguished, now hung limp and lifeless around a face marked by exhaustion and surrender. The woman staring back at me looked ancient, forgotten, irrelevant. I'd catch myself talking to Harold, sometimes asking him what I should have for dinner, or telling him about something I'd seen on the news. The silence that followed was deafening, a reminder that even my conversations had become one-sided. The worst part wasn't the grief, was the crushing realization that at 60 I had become invisible. Cashiers looked through me, waitresses forgot my orders, and younger people stepped around me on sidewalks as if I were furniture. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, watching the world move forward without me. On that particular March morning, as I sat in Harold's chair with my lukewarm coffee growing cold, I made a decision that frightened me with its finality. I would stop trying, stop pretending that tomorrow would be different, stop hoping that someone might need me again. I would simply exist until I didn't anymore. I pulled Harold's old Afghan over my shoulders and closed my eyes, surrendering to the emptiness that had become my closest companion. Outside, I could hear the neighbors starting their cars, children laughing as they walked to school, life continuing, as if I had already disappeared, and maybe I thought I had. It hadn't always been this way. As I sat in that silence, memories flooded back like pages from a photo album I'd kept closed too long. I was Margaret Eleanor Davis then, 22 years old with dreams bigger than my small hometown could contain. I'd met Harold at a church dance in 1963, where he'd asked me to dance to Moon River with such nervous politeness that I couldn't help but say yes. He was studying to be an engineer, and I was working as a secretary at the local bank, saving every penny to go back to college for my teaching degree. We married in 1965, and for a while, everything felt possible. Harold got a good job at the manufacturing plant, and I became pregnant with Sarah just 6 months after our wedding. We were happy, really happy, in that simple way young couples are when they believe love can conquer anything. But somewhere along the way, I lost pieces of myself. When Sarah was born, I put my teaching dreams on hold, temporarily, I told myself. Then came the miscarriages, 3 of them over 6 years, each one chipping away at my sense of purpose. Harold threw himself into his work, and I threw myself into making our house perfect, our marriage picture perfect. Our small family, the envy of our neighborhood. Sarah grew up beautiful and headstrong. Everything I'd once been before life taught me to make myself smaller. She went to college, got married, had children of her own, and slowly, naturally, needed me less and less. I told myself that was the way it should be, that good mothers raise children to leave them. But the truth was, I didn't know who I was when I wasn't needed. Harold and I had settled into comfortable routines: his workshop in the basement where he'd tinker with old radios, my kitchen where I'd try new recipes from magazines, our evenings spent reading or watching television in companionable silence. We were content, I suppose, but I wonder now if we were truly happy or just too tired to imagine anything different. When Harold was diagnosed with cancer at 67, it felt like a cruel joke. We'd finally reached retirement, finally had time to do all those things we'd always talked about: traveling, visiting Sarah and the grandchildren more often, maybe even getting that RV we'd dreamed about. Instead, we spent 2 years in and out of hospitals fighting a battle we both knew we wouldn't win. I became Harold's caregiver advocate, and sometimes his memory when the treatments made him foggy and confused. I told myself I was doing what wives do, what love requires. But the truth was more complicated. Taking care of Harold gave me purpose again, made me feel essential in a way I hadn't in years. When he died, I didn't just lose my husband, I lost my job, my identity, my reason for getting up in the morning. The day of Harold's funeral, our house was full of people sharing memories and casseroles. Sarah held my hand during the service, and for a moment I thought maybe we'd grow closer through our shared grief. But within weeks she was back to her busy life, calling out of duty rather than desire, visiting because she felt she should, not because she wanted my company. I tried to stay connected with the women from church, but they were all coupled, and I was suddenly the odd one out. At dinner parties, there wasn't a place for a single woman my age. At social events, I was the widow they felt sorry for but didn't quite know how to include. Gradually, I stopped accepting invitations, and eventually they stopped coming. The grandchildren, now teenagers, were sweet but distant. I remembered when they were small, how they'd run to me with scraped knees and hurt feelings, how they'd beg me to read just one more story or make my special chocolate chip cookies. Now they had their own lives, their own interests, their own grandparents on the other side who lived in more exciting cities and gave more expensive gifts. I'd tried volunteering at the hospital, but they wanted people who could commit to long-term schedules and learn new computer systems. I'd tried joining a book club at the library, but the women there already had their established friendships and inside jokes. I'd even tried taking a watercolor class at the community center, but I felt foolish among people who seemed to know exactly what they were doing while I struggled to paint anything that didn't look like a mess. One evening about 6 months after Harold's death, I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, really looking at myself for the first time in weeks. The woman staring back at me looked tired, sad, and utterly forgettable. I realized I couldn't remember the last time someone had really looked at me, really seen me as a person rather than just a polite obligation or a reminder of their own mortality. That's when it hit me. I had become exactly what society expects a 60-year-old widow to be: invisible, irrelevant, counting down the days until it was acceptable to stop pretending that my life still mattered. I wasn't living. I was just occupying space and waiting to stop. The realization should have motivated me to change, to fight back against the loneliness and obscurity. Instead, it made me feel hopeless. If this was what aging meant, this slow fade into irrelevance, then what was the point of struggling against it? So I stopped struggling. I embraced the invisibility, the routine, the slow surrender to insignificance. It seemed easier than fighting for a life that no one seemed to notice anyway. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon in late March, cutting through the silence like a knife through fabric. I almost didn't answer it. Telemarketers were about the only people who called anymore, and I'd grown tired of explaining that I didn't need new insurance or extended car warranties. But something made me reach for the receiver on the fourth ring. Mrs. Walsh. Margaret Walsh. The voice was unfamiliar, professional but warm. "Yes," I said hesitantly, prepared to hang up on another sales pitch. "My name is Jennifer Mitchell. I'm calling from the Riverside Community Center. I hope I'm not bothering you, but I got your number from the volunteer database at St. Mary's Church." I frowned. I hadn't volunteered at St. Mary's in over a year, not since Father McKenna had gently suggested that perhaps the younger women should take over the parish newsletter. "I'm calling because we're starting a new program, and, frankly, Mrs. Walsh, we need someone with your background and experience." My background and experience? I almost laughed. What background? What experience? I was a secretary 40 years ago and a housewife after that. What could I possibly offer anyone? "I think you have the wrong person," I said, ready to hang up. "Wait, please, hear me out. We're launching an intergenerational mentorship program called Bridges. The idea is to pair older adults with young people who are struggling with life transitions, kids aging out of foster care, young adults who've dropped out of college, people in their 20s who feel lost and could use some guidance. I listened despite myself. According to your church records, you raised a daughter who became a successful teacher. You were married for 35 years and you managed a household budget through good times and bad. That's exactly the kind of real-world wisdom these kids need. Real-world wisdom. When was the last time anyone had suggested I had something valuable to offer? Mrs. Walsh, are you still there? I'm here, I whispered. The thing is, we're not looking for people to lecture or give advice. We're looking for people who can just be present. Listen, share stories. Maybe teach some practical skills, like cooking or budgeting. The research shows that young people who have older mentors are significantly more likely to succeed. But here's what's beautiful about it: the mentors report feeling more purposeful and connected to. I felt something stir in my chest, something I hadn't felt in so long I'd forgotten what to call it. Hope, interest. I wasn't sure. I don't know, I said slowly. I'm not sure I'd be any good at it. It's been a long time since I felt useful to anyone. Mrs. Walsh, Jennifer said gently, can I tell you something? I've been running programs for young adults for 8 years now. I've seen kids who've been through the system, kids who've made mistakes, kids who just need someone to believe in them. What they need most isn't someone perfect. They need someone real. Someone who's lived through hard things and came out the other side. I wasn't sure I was through anything yet. Wasn't sure I was on any side at all. Would you be willing to just come in for a coffee? No commitment. Just let me tell you more about it. I found myself holding my breath. When had I last been invited anywhere that wasn't out of pity or obligation? I started, then stopped. What harm could coffee do? When? How about Thursday at 2 p.m.? The community center is downtown on Main Street, right across from the old movie theater. I knew the place. Harold and I used to take Sarah there for swimming lessons 30 years ago. I hadn't been back since. Okay, I heard myself say, I'll come for coffee. After I hung up, I sat staring at the phone for a long time. Something had shifted in those 10 minutes. Something so subtle I might have missed it if I hadn't been paying attention. For the first time in months, I was thinking about Thursday, actually looking forward to something. I walked to the mirror in the hallway and studied my reflection again. Same tired face, same dull eyes, but maybe was I imagining it? Something had awakened behind them. What do you think, Harold? I asked the empty room. Am I crazy to even consider this? The silence that followed wasn't quite as heavy as usual. Maybe it was my imagination, but it almost felt like permission. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened my closet and actually considered what to wear. Not just whatever clean clothes were closest, but something that might make me look like a person who had something to offer. I found a blue cardigan that Harold always said brought out my eyes and a pair of slacks that still fit reasonably well. As I got ready for bed, I realized I wasn't dreading tomorrow quite as much as usual. Thursday was only 2 days away, and for the first time in a very long time, I was curious about what might happen next. I lay in bed that night thinking about the young people Jennifer had described. Kids aging out of foster care, college dropouts, 20-somethings who felt lost. I tried to imagine what I could possibly say to someone like that, what wisdom I could share, but then I remembered being 22 and terrified about everything motherhood, whether I'd ever figure out how to be the person I was supposed to become. I remembered the women who had helped me along the way, not with grand gestures or perfect advice, but just by treating me like I mattered, like my questions were worth answering, like my struggles were normal and survivable. Maybe that was enough. Maybe just showing up and paying attention was more valuable than I'd realized. For the first time in 2 years, I fell asleep thinking about the future instead of the past. Thursday arrived with an unexpected sense of anticipation. I found myself taking extra care, getting dressed, even applying a little lipstick, something I hadn't bothered with since Harold's funeral. The woman in the mirror looked tired still, but there was something different about her expression. She looked like someone with somewhere to be. The drive to the community center felt longer than it should have. I'd forgotten how nervous I could feel about meeting new people, how vulnerable it made me to step outside my carefully constructed isolation. I almost turned around twice, convincing myself that Jennifer had made a mistake, that I had nothing to offer anyone, but I kept driving. The Riverside Community Center buzzed with activity I hadn't expected. Children's laughter echoed from what must have been a daycare program, and I could see teenagers playing basketball through the windows of a gymnasium. It felt alive in a way my house never did anymore. Jennifer Mitchell turned out to be a woman, in her 40s with kind eyes and the sort of energy that made you feel like, whatever she was doing was the most important thing in the world. She greeted me with genuine warmth, not the careful politeness I'd grown used to. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm so glad you came. Can I get you some coffee? We have cookies too there from our baking program." As she led me through the center, she pointed out different programs happening around us. A group of elderly men were playing chess in one corner while a circle of women worked on what looked like a quilting project. In another room, teenagers were working on computers while adults helped them with what Jennifer explained was job application training. "The beautiful thing about this place," Jennifer said as we settled into her office with our coffee, "is that everyone here has something to give and something to learn. Age doesn't matter, wisdom does." She told me about the Bridges program in more detail. Young adults between 18 and 25 would be paired with mentors over 54 weekly meetings over 6 months. The goals were flexible, sometimes it was practical. Help like learning to cook or budget, sometimes it was emotional support during difficult transitions, and sometimes it was just having a consistent adult who showed up and believed in them. "Can I tell you about Marcus?" Jennifer asked. "He's 22, aged out of foster care at 18. And he's been struggling to keep jobs because he never learned some basic life skills that most of us take for granted. He can fix any engine you put in front of him, but he doesn't know how to write a professional email or cook anything that doesn't come from a microwave." I found myself leaning forward, genuinely interested. "And then there's Sophia. She's 24, dropped out of college because she couldn't afford it, and she's been living with friends and working part-time jobs. She's incredibly smart and artistic, but she's convinced she's a failure because she didn't follow the traditional path. She could use someone who understands that life doesn't always go according to plan." As Jennifer talked about these young people, I felt something stirring that I'd almost forgotten: the desire to help, to make a difference in someone's life. When Sarah was growing up, some of my happiest moments had been helping her through challenges, celebrating her successes, just being the steady presence she could count on. "What would be expected of me?" I asked. 2 hours a week, minimum. Usually people meet here at the center, but some mentors have coffee dates or go for walks. One of our most successful pairs spends their time cooking together. The mentor teaches recipes while they talk about life. Another pair works in our community garden. It's really about finding what works for both people. The idea of having a regular commitment, a reason to leave the house twice a week, felt both terrifying and exciting. "Mrs. Walsh, can I ask you something? What's been the hardest part about the last couple of years for you?" The question caught me off guard. Most people asked how I was doing but never really wanted an honest answer. "Feeling invisible," I said, without thinking, then felt embarrassed by my honesty. Jennifer nodded knowingly. "That's exactly why we need you. These kids feel invisible too, just for different reasons. Society either ignores them or sees them as problems to be solved. They need someone who understands what it feels like to be overlooked." Before I could talk myself out of it, I said yes. Jennifer introduced me to 2 staff members and gave me a tour of the spaces where mentors typically met with their The center had small conference rooms, a kitchen for cooking activities, a computer lab, and even a small library. Everything was bright and clean and purposeful. "We'll start the matching process next week," Jennifer explained. "We look at personalities, interests, and what each person is hoping to get from the relationship. It's not always perfect, but we have about an 85% success rate with our pairings." As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: excitement mixed with nervousness. I had somewhere to be next week. Someone was counting on me to show up. I mattered to a program that mattered to other people. That evening, I did something unprecedented. I called Sarah. "Mom." She sounded surprised. I usually waited for her to call me. "Hi, sweetheart. I wanted to tell you about something I'm doing." I told her about the mentorship program, about Jennifer, about the possibility of being paired with a young person who might need some guidance. "Mom, that's wonderful." Sarah sounded genuinely pleased, not just politely supportive. "You always were so good with young people. Remember how all my friends used to come to you with their problems?" I had forgotten about that. How Sarah's teenage friends would linger in our kitchen after school, asking my advice about boys and colleges and fights with their parents. I'd felt useful then, needed in a way that had nothing to do with cooking dinner or doing laundry. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Sarah asked, and I could hear both hope and concern in her voice. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I think I need to try." After we hung up, I sat in Harold's chair and looked around our living room with new eyes. Tomorrow, I would dust off the guest room, maybe buy some flowers for the kitchen table. If I was going to start showing up for someone else, I needed to start showing up for myself too. For the first time in 2 years, I went to bed thinking about what tomorrow might bring instead of what yesterday had taken away. 3 weeks after I started meeting with Sophia, reality crashed into my newfound purpose like a sledgehammer through glass. Sofia Rodriguez was not what I had expected. At 24, she was fierce and fragile at the same time, with dark eyes that seemed to hold too much experience for someone so young. She'd dropped out of college when her mother got sick, worked 3 part-time jobs to pay medical bills, and then found herself adrift when her mother passed away 6 months ago. Now she was staying on friends' couches, unsure of what came next. Our first few meetings had gone well, I thought. We'd talked about practical things, budgeting, job applications, healthy meals on a tight budget. But more than that, we'd talked about loss and how it changes you, about feeling like you've disappointed everyone, including yourself, about the fear that you've missed your chance at the life you were supposed to have. I understood those feelings more than she knew. Sofia was working toward getting back into college, and she'd asked if I might help her with an essay for her readmission application. She wanted to write about her mother's illness and how caring for her had taught her about strength and sacrifice. As she read her draft aloud, I felt tears in my eyes. Her words were raw and beautiful and true. "Mrs. Walsh," she said, when she finished reading, Would you mind sharing this with someone? I think it could help other people who've gone through something similar." That's when I made my mistake. I was so proud of her work, so moved by her story, that I shared it with Jennifer during our monthly mentor check-in. I thought I was being supportive, celebrating Sofia's growth and talent. Jennifer read the essay and was equally impressed. "This is incredibly powerful," she said. "You know, there's a local journalist who's been wanting to do a story about our program. Would Sofia be interested in being interviewed? Her story could inspire other young people." I should have asked Sofia first. I should have remembered that her story wasn't mine to share, that trust is fragile and permission matters. Instead, I was so excited about the opportunity, so eager to help her get recognition, that I said yes before thinking it through. When I told Sofia about the interview possibility the next week, her reaction stunned me. "You did what?" Her voice was quiet, but I could see something crumbling in her expression. "I thought it would be good for you," I said quickly. "A chance to inspire other people, maybe get some visibility for when you apply to colleges." "You had no right." The words were sharp, final. "That essay was private. It was about my mother, my life, my pain. You had no right to share it with anyone." I tried to explain, to apologize, but Sofia was already gathering her things. "You know what the worst part is?" she said, her voice shaking. "I trusted you. I thought you understood what it was like to feel invisible, to have people make decisions about your life without asking you first. But you're just like everyone else, you think you know what's best for me." She left, and I sat alone in the conference room feeling sick to my stomach. How had I gotten it so wrong? How had I taken something beautiful and meaningful and destroyed it with my good intentions? Jennifer was understanding but frank when I told her what had happened. "Margaret, I think your heart was in the right place, but you crossed a boundary. Trust is everything in these relationships, and it takes time to rebuild once it's broken." I went home that day feeling worse than I had since Harold's death. Not just sad, but ashamed. I'd been given a chance to matter again, to make a difference in someone's life, and I'd ruined it through my own thoughtlessness, but the real blow came 3 days later. Sarah called, and I could tell from her tone that something was wrong. "Mom, I've been talking to Jim." Jim was her husband. "We're worried about you?" "Worried? Why?" "This mentoring thing, Mom? Are you sure it's healthy? You seem so invested in this girl's life, and now you're upset because of some conflict? With her, maybe it's too much too soon after Dad's death." I felt the ground shifting beneath me. "Sarah, this program has been the best thing that's happened to me in 2 years. Has it, though? Because you sound more upset now than you've been in months. Maybe you need to focus on healing yourself before you try to help other people." After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my living room, afraid to turn on the lights. Sarah's words echoed in my head, mixing with my own doubts and regrets. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was too damaged, too needy, too old to be of real help to anyone. The next morning, I called Jennifer and told her I was quitting the program. "Margaret, wait. Let's talk about this. What happened with Sofia was a learning experience, not a failure. These relationships are complicated." "I don't think I'm cut out for this," I interrupted. "I thought I had something to offer, but maybe I was kidding myself. Maybe I should stick to what I know. And what's that?" The question hung in the air because I didn't have an answer. What did I know? How to be a widow, how to disappear, how to give up. For the next week, I returned to my old routines with a vengeance. Coffee, toast, television, silence. But now the emptiness felt different, heavier. I'd tasted purpose again, felt needed, and losing it was somehow worse than never having it at all. I kept thinking about Sofia, wondering if she'd found another mentor, if she was okay, if she'd ever forgive me for betraying her trust. I wanted to reach out, to apologize properly, but I was afraid I'd only make things worse. The worst part was that I understood why she'd been so angry. In my eagerness to help, I'd done exactly what she'd experienced her whole life. I'd made decisions about her story, her life, her future, without consulting her. I'd treated her like a project rather than a person. I was 60 years old, and I was still making the same mistakes I'd made as a young woman, assuming I knew best. Acting first and asking permission later, letting my enthusiasm override my judgment. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe I wasn't ready for this kind of responsibility. Maybe some people are meant to fade into the background, to live quietly and cause no harm because they're too damaged to do any good. The thought terrified me because it felt so true. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 4 weeks after Sophia had walked out of the community center. I almost threw it away without opening it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and I'd grown wary of anything that might bring more disappointment into my carefully reconstructed solitude, but something made me look twice at the return address. It was Sophia's name, written in the same careful handwriting I'd seen on her college application essays. My hands trembled as I opened it. Dear Mrs. Walsh, I've been carrying this letter around for 2 weeks, writing it and rewriting it, trying to find the right words. I'm not sure there are right words for what I need to say, but I'm going to try. First, I owe you an apology. The way I reacted when you told me about the journalist was unfair to you. Yes, you should have asked me first. And yes, I was hurt that you shared my story without permission, but I said some things that weren't true and weren't fair. You're not like everyone else who's made decisions about my life. You're nothing like them. I've been thinking a lot about our conversations, about the things you told me about losing your husband and feeling invisible. I've been thinking about how you listened when I talked about my mom, how you never once made me feel stupid or broken, or like I was asking for too much. Do you remember what you said to me during our 3rd meeting? I'd been talking about how guilty I felt for dropping out of college, how I felt like I'd wasted all the sacrifices my mother made for me. You said, Sophia, love isn't wasted when it changes you into someone who can love others better. You said, caring for my mother wasn't a detour from my life, it was part of my life, and it made me stronger, more compassionate, more real. No one had ever said anything like that to me before. Everyone else kept telling me I was young and had plenty of time to get back on track. Like the last 4 years were just a mistake I needed to erase. But you understood that they were part of my story, not something separate from it. I need to tell you something, Mrs. Walsh. After our fight, I almost quit the program entirely. I was so angry and hurt, and I figured it proved that adults couldn't be trusted, that I was better off on my own. But Jennifer asked me to wait a week before making any decisions. During that week, I kept thinking about our conversations, about the way you talked about your own life. You never tried to pretend that losing your husband was anything other than devastating. You never tried to silverline it or tell me everything happens for a reason. You just said it was hard and lonely and unfair, and that some days you had to choose to keep going even when you didn't want to. That's when I realized something. You sharing my essay without asking wasn't about you thinking you knew what was best for me. It was about you being excited that someone my age had written something so powerful. About you being proud of me the way you might be proud of a daughter or granddaughter. You made a mistake, but it came from caring too much, not from caring too little. I've had plenty of adults in my life who made decisions without asking me, but they were always about what was easiest for them, not what might be good for me. You're the first person who made a mistake because you believed in me too much. I wanted to tell you this in person, but Jennifer said you'd left the program. She said you felt like you weren't cut out for mentoring. Like maybe you'd done more harm than good. Mrs. Walsh, that's not true. Not even close. Do you want to know what happened after you shared my essay? Jennifer told me about the journalist, and I said no to the interview. But something about the whole thing made me realize I did want to share my story, just in my own way, in my own time. I've been volunteering at the hospital where my mom was treated, talking to other families going through what we went through. I'm using my story to help people, but on my terms. That would never have happened if you hadn't believed my words were worth sharing in the first place. I'm writing to ask if you'd consider coming back to the program. Not necessarily to be my mentor, I understand if that bridge is burned, but to help other people the way you helped me, because despite our fight, despite the mistake you made, you changed my life. You made me feel seen and valued and understood in a way that no one else has. You treated my pain as important and my dreams as possible. You never once made me feel like I was too much or too complicated or too damaged. Mrs. Walsh, you told me that you felt invisible, like your life didn't matter anymore. I need you to know that's not true. You matter to me. You mattered to me before our fight, and you matter to me now, and you'll matter to me for the rest of my life. There's something else I want to tell you, something that might sound strange. You said you felt invisible, but I think maybe you've just been looking for the wrong kind of visibility. You've been waiting for someone to see you the way the world used to see you, as Harold's wife, as Sarah's mother, as the person you were before grief changed everything. But I saw you as Margaret, just Margaret, the woman who makes incredible banana bread and tells stories that make me laugh and understands that healing isn't linear and believes that people can start over at any age. I saw you as someone with wisdom earned through living, not wisdom inherited or learned from books. I saw you as someone who still has love to give and stories to tell and ways to make the world a little bit better. I saw you as someone who matters not because of who you used to be, but because of who you are right now. If you never come back to the program, I'll understand. But please don't give up on yourself. Please don't decide that you're too old or too broken or to anything to make a difference in this world. You've already made a difference in mine. With gratitude and hope. Sophia. P.S. I've enclosed something for you. It's a copy of my readmission essay, a different one I wrote, about second chances and unexpected mentors and how sometimes the people who save us are the ones who need saving too. I have your permission to share this one, if you'd like to read it to other people who might need to hear it. I sat in my kitchen with tears streaming down my face, reading Sophia's letter for the third time. The second essay was even more beautiful than the first, but this one was about hope instead of loss, about finding family in unexpected places, about learning that wisdom doesn't come from having all the answers, but from being brave enough to show up even when you don't. She wrote, about me, about us, about how two people from different generations and completely different backgrounds had found something in each other that they didn't even know they were looking for. But more than that, she'd given me something I hadn't realized I needed. She'd seen me, not as the ghost of who I used to be, but as who I was becoming. Not as someone diminished by loss, but as someone deepened by it. Not as a woman whose story was ending, but as one whose most important chapters might just be beginning. I walked to the mirror in the hallway and looked at my reflection again. Same face, same silver hair, same lines around the eyes, but something fundamental had shifted. The woman looking back at me wasn't invisible anymore. She was someone who mattered to a young woman brave enough to put her trust back into the world. She was someone who had something to offer, even if she didn't always offer it perfectly. I picked up the phone and dialed Jennifer's number. Jennifer, it's Margaret Walsh. Is it too late to change my mind about the program? Jennifer's laughter was warm and immediate. Margaret, I was hoping you'd call. When did you change your mind? About 20 minutes ago, I said, still holding Sophia's letter. I got a letter that made me realize I might have been looking at things all wrong. Would you be willing to come in tomorrow? I'd love to talk with you about rejoining the program, and actually, Jennifer paused. There's something I'd like to discuss with you. A new opportunity. The next morning I found myself back in Jennifer's office, but this time I felt different walking through those doors. The nervous uncertainty was still there, but it was mixed with something stronger. Determination. Before we talk about mentoring again, Jennifer said, I need to tell you about something that's been developing. We've been getting requests from other community centers around the state, asking about replicating our Bridges program. The success we've had here has gotten some attention. I nodded, wondering where this was leading. The thing is, we need someone to help train new mentors at these other sites. Someone who understands both the potential and the pitfalls of these relationships. Someone who's made mistakes and learned from them. Jennifer smiled. Someone like you? My heart skipped. You want me to train other mentors? I want you to consider it. It would mean travel maybe one weekend a month to different cities. It would mean sharing your story, talking about what you've learned, helping other older adults find their footing in this kind of work. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Me, training other people. Me, traveling to new places, speaking. Two groups, being seen as someone with expertise worth sharing. I don't know if I'm qualified for something like that, I said slowly. Margaret, you've lived through profound loss and found your way back to purpose. You've made a significant mistake in judgment and learned from it. You've touched the life of a young person in a way that changed both of you. What more qualification could there be? I thought about it for a moment. 6 months ago, I'd been convinced my life was over, that I had nothing left to contribute to the world. Now someone was asking me to help expand a program that was changing lives across the state. Could I think about it? Maybe start by taking on another mentee here first, see how that goes. Of course. In fact, I have someone in mind for you. His name is David. He's 23, and he's been waiting for the right match for 2 months. Jennifer told me about David, a young man who'd been in and out of college, struggled with anxiety and depression, and was trying to figure out his path forward. He was interested in writing, but convinced he wasn't good enough, working part-time jobs, but dreaming of something more meaningful. He specifically asked for a mentor who'd been through significant loss, Jennifer said. He lost his father 2 years ago, and he says he feels like he's been drifting ever since. Something clicked into place. This young man wasn't just looking for career advice or practical life skills. He was looking for someone who understood grief, who knew how it could derail your entire sense of who you were supposed to be. I'd like to meet him, I said. There's one more thing, Jennifer added. David saw Sophia's second essay. She shared it with our writing group here at the center. He said he'd never read anything that captured what grief felt like so perfectly. And when he heard that her mentor had helped her find the courage to write it, he specifically requested someone with your background. I felt a surge of something. That was part pride, part amazement. Sophia's words, written partly about our relationship, had already reached someone else who needed to hear them. The ripple effect of connection was spreading in ways I never could have imagined. That afternoon, I met David in the same conference room where Sophia and I had spent so many hours together. He was tall and thin, with serious dark eyes and the kind of careful posture that suggested he was used to protecting himself from disappointment. "Mrs. Walsh," he said, standing up as I entered. "I'm David. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." His politeness reminded me of Harold when we first met, formal and nervous, trying so hard to make a good impression. "Please, just call me Margaret," I said, "and thank you for being patient while I figured out whether I belonged in this program." David smiled, the first real expression I'd seen from him. "Jennifer told me you took some time off after a difficult situation with another mentee. I respect that. It shows you take this seriously." As we talked, I found myself thinking about the choice I was facing. I could return to my safe, quiet life, avoiding the risk of making more mistakes or experiencing more disappointment. Or I could embrace this new version of myself, someone who stumbled sometimes but kept showing up. Someone who had something to offer precisely because she'd been broken and was choosing to heal. David talked about his father's sudden death, about how it had shattered his confidence and left him questioning everything he'd thought he wanted from life. He talked about feeling like he was disappointing everyone by not getting over it fast enough, by not having a clear plan for his future. I found myself sharing things I'd never said to anyone, not about Harold's death itself, but about the aftermath, about how grief had made me feel like a stranger to myself, about how I'd lost not just my husband, but my sense of purpose, my identity, my place in the world. "The thing no one tells you about grief," I said, "is that it doesn't just take away what you've lost. It makes you question everything you still have." David nodded, and I could see tears in his eyes. "Yes, exactly. Like, how do I make plans for the future when I couldn't even see his death coming?" "You make small plans," I said. "You commit to next week, next month. You show up for things that matter even when you don't feel like it. And slowly, very slowly, you start to trust that the future might hold something good again." When our hour was up, David asked if we could meet again the following week. As I walked to my car, I realized I'd made my choice without even realizing it. I wasn't just going to return to the program, I was going to embrace everything it offered, including the training opportunity Jennifer had mentioned. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since before Harold's death. I called Sarah and asked if she and the kids wanted to come for dinner on Sunday. "Really, Mom? You feel up to having everyone over?" "I do," I said, and meant it. "I have some things I want to tell you about what I've been doing, and I want to hear about your lives, really hear about them." After we hung up, I looked around my house and started making a mental list of what needed to be done before Sunday. Grocery shopping, cleaning, maybe some flowers for the table, but more than that, I needed to prepare myself to be fully present with my family, to show up as the person I was becoming rather than hiding behind the person I used to be. I was 60 years old, and I was choosing to begin again. 6 months later, I stood in a conference room in Columbus, Ohio, looking at faces that reflected my own nervous excitement back at me. They were men and women, mostly over 55, who had signed up for mentor training despite having no idea what they were getting themselves into. I knew exactly how they felt. "My name is Margaret Walsh," I began, "and 18 months ago, I was convinced my life was over. I was wrong." The training program had grown beyond anything Jennifer and I had imagined when we first discussed it. We were now in 12 cities across Ohio and had requests from community centers in 3 other states. I traveled twice a month, sometimes more, sharing what I'd learned about the delicate art of showing up for someone else's life, but the real transformation had begun much closer to home. David and I had been meeting for 5 months now, and watching him rediscover his confidence had been like watching a flower bloom in fast motion. He'd started writing again, first just journal entries to process his grief, then short stories, and now he was 3 chapters into what he called a novel about learning to live with uncertainty. More importantly, he'd begun to see his father's death not as the end of his story, but as a painful chapter that had taught him about the preciousness of time and the importance of pursuing work that felt meaningful. He'd enrolled in a community college writing program and gotten a part-time job at the local newspaper. "You know what I've realized?" he'd said during our last meeting. "I spent 2 years thinking I was supposed to get back to being the person I was before my dad died, but that person doesn't exist anymore. The person I am now has different priorities, different strengths, different understanding. That's not worse, it's just different." His insight had moved me to tears because it captured something I was still learning about myself. The woman I was becoming wasn't a diminished version of Harold's wife or Sarah's mother. She was Margaret's someone who had loved deeply and lost profoundly and was choosing to love again anyway. Sophia and I had resumed our mentoring relationship, but it had evolved into something closer to friendship. She'd been accepted back into college and was thriving, but she still came to our weekly coffee dates to talk through challenges and celebrate successes. She'd also started co-facilitating a support group for young adults who'd lost parents, and she often asked me to attend as a guest speaker. "You know what's funny?" she'd said recently. "I used to think older people had it all figured out, that by the time you were 60 you'd know exactly who you were and what your life was about. But watching you change and grow has taught me that we're all just figuring it out as we go along." The ripple effects had spread in directions I never could have anticipated. Sarah and I were closer than we'd been in years, talking regularly and honestly about our lives, our fears, our hopes. She'd even started volunteering at a literacy program in her own community, inspired by what she called my second act. The grandchildren, now 16 and 14, had begun asking me about the mentoring program and the young people I worked with. They seemed genuinely interested in my stories, and I realized they were seeing me as a person with her own adventures rather than just their obligatory grandparent. But perhaps the most unexpected change was in my relationship with myself. The woman who had once felt invisible now felt vibrantly, purposefully present. I had places to be, people counting on me, stories to tell, wisdom to share, not because I'd figured everything out, but because I'd learned that stumbling forward with compassion was more valuable than standing still with certainty. At the training in Columbus, I shared the story of my mistake with Sophia, how I'd violated her trust with the best of intentions and nearly destroyed our relationship in the process. Mentoring isn't about being perfect, I told the group. It's about being real. It's about showing up consistently, listening carefully, and being willing to acknowledge when you've gotten something wrong. These young people have usually had plenty of adults in their lives who claim to know what was best for them. What they need from us is authenticity, not expertise. A woman in the front row raised her hand. "But what if we don't have anything valuable to offer? What if our lives have been too ordinary?" I smiled, remembering asking Jennifer almost the same question. There's no such thing as an ordinary life. You've survived challenges, made decisions, learned from mistakes, found ways to love and be loved. You've developed strategies for getting through difficult times and wisdom about what really matters. That's not ordinary. That's exactly what someone half your age needs to hear. After the training, a man approached me, probably in his early 60s, with kind eyes and the sort of careful posture that suggested recent loss. "Mrs. Walsh, my wife died 8 months ago," he said quietly. "I've been thinking about signing up for this program, but I wasn't sure I was ready. Hearing you talk today, I think maybe I am." I gave him Jennifer's contact information and my card. "Call me if you have questions," I said, "or if you just need someone to talk to who understands." As I drove home from Columbus that evening, I thought about the woman I'd been 18 months ago, invisible, convinced her story was over. I thought about the phone call from Jennifer that had started everything, about the courage it had taken to show up for that first coffee meeting, about all the small choices that had led to this moment. I was 60 years old, and I was more myself than I'd ever been. Not despite my losses and mistakes and imperfections, but because of them. Not because I'd returned to who I used to be, but because I'd discovered who I was meant to become. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Finished chapter 4 today. Can't wait to read it to you next week. Hope the training went well. Thanks for showing me it's possible to build something beautiful from broken pieces." I smiled and typed back, "Congratulations. Can't wait to hear it." And David, "Thank you for showing me the same thing." The highway stretched ahead of me in the gathering darkness, but I wasn't afraid of what lay beyond the reach of my headlights. For the first time in years, I was excited to find out. As I pulled into my driveway that night, I sat in the car for a moment looking at my house, the same house where I'd once felt like a ghost haunting her own life. Now it looked different. Not because anything had changed about the structure, but because everything had changed about the woman living inside it. I thought about all the people who'd told me that life begins at 40, but no one had ever mentioned that it could begin again at 60. No one had told me that the chapters I thought were endings might actually be introductions to stories I didn't even know I wanted to tell. The truth is, I'd spent 2 years mourning the wrong thing. I'd been grieving the end of my old life instead of preparing for the beginning of my new one. I'd been looking backward at who I used to be instead of forward to who I might become. Tomorrow, I would meet with David and hear about chapter 4 of his novel. Tomorrow, I would call a community center in Kentucky that wanted to start their own mentoring program. Tomorrow, I would have Sunday dinner with Sarah and her family. Not as an obligation they had to endure, but as a celebration of the woman I was becoming. Tomorrow, I would continue to show up imperfectly, courageously, authentically for a life that was far from over. I thought my story had ended when Harold died. I was wrong. That story had ended, but stories end so that new ones can begin. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, if you're brave enough to answer unexpected phone calls and trust strangers with your broken heart, the new story is even better than the one that came before. Not easier, not without pain or uncertainty or moments when you question everything, but better because it's yours. Not the life someone else expected you to live, but the one you chose to create from whatever pieces remained. I'm 61 now, and I can tell you this: it's never too late to surprise yourself. It's never too late to discover that you have more love to give, more wisdom to share, more life to live than you ever imagined. It's never too late to stop being invisible and start being unforgettable. Have you ever felt like your story was over? Have you ever discovered that what felt like an ending was actually a beginning? I'd love to hear about your own second chances, your unexpected opportunities, your moments of choosing to begin again. Share your story in the comments below. You never know who might need to hear that it's possible to write new chapters at any age. And if this story moved you, please share it with someone who might need to be reminded that 60, 70, 18 age is too late to start the most important chapter of your life. Because the truth is, we're all just figuring it out as we go along, and sometimes the most beautiful stories begin when we think everything has already been written.